The auditorium was packed with proud parents, friends, and faculty as the graduation ceremony was about to begin. The air buzzed with excitement, the crowd murmuring in anticipation. Students, dressed in caps and gowns, stood with wide smiles and anxious hearts, ready to take that monumental step into the next chapter of their lives. Among them was Jason Carter, a top student with a bright future ahead of him, but as he waited for his name to be called, his eyes kept darting to the back of the room. His mother still hadn't arrived. For Jason, his mother, Sarah, was everything. She had raised him on her own, working multiple jobs, sacrificing sleep and comfort to ensure he had the opportunities she never did. She promised she'd be there, no matter what. But as the minutes passed and the ceremony began, a knot of worry formed in Jason's stomach. Had something happened? He tried to focus on the speaker at the podium, but his mind wandered back to his mother. She was never late. Suddenly, the doors at the rear of the auditorium creaked open, heads turned, and whispers rippled through the crowd. There she was, Sarah Carter. Except, something was wrong. She wasn't dressed like the other parents, who wore their finest attire. Instead, she was covered in dirt and sweat, her clothes disheveled, her hair a tangled mess. Her shoes looked worn, as if she'd been walking for miles. Jason's heart sank. Embarrassment flushed his face as his classmates nudged each other, exchanging looks of pity and confusion. He felt the heat of 1,000 eyes on him, but all he could do was watch as his mother walked slowly toward the back row, trying to blend into the shadows. She carried herself with the same quiet dignity as always, but there was no hiding the exhaustion in her eyes. Jason's mind raced. Why was she in such a state? He could see the strain on her face, the heaviness of whatever she had gone through to get there. His pride in her began to outweigh his embarrassment, but still, he felt the stares burning into him. His friends whispered behind him, and Jason knew he had a choice to make. He could ignore her, focus on the ceremony, and pretend like nothing had happened, or he could do something else, something bold. The moment came when his name was called. Jason Carter. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. As he stood up to receive his diploma, his heart pounded in his chest. He had planned a simple thank you speech, but now, he knew he couldn't let this moment pass without addressing the most important person in his life. With every step he took toward the stage, Jason's mind solidified around a single idea. Taking the diploma in hand, Jason looked out at the sea of faces. His classmates sat poised, waiting for the usual rehearsed speech, but Jason had something entirely different planned. He stepped up to the microphone, his hands trembling slightly, and took a deep breath. Then, with a clear voice, he began to speak. Before I say anything else, I want to tell you all about someone truly special. Jason's voice reverberated through the quiet auditorium, capturing everyone's attention. His classmates sat up straighter, sensing something different from the usual graduation speech. I want to tell you about someone who isn't up here on stage but deserves all the recognition in the world. The room remained still, the whispers now gone as Jason's words sliced through the air. He didn't even look at his diploma as he placed it on the podium in front of him. Instead, his eyes found his mother, sitting in the far back, her worn-out clothes and dirty hands telling a story that none of the spectators could have imagined. He knew he had to reveal the truth about the sacrifices she had made. My mother, Jason began, his voice steady, is the reason I'm standing here today. She's the one who worked late into the night, sometimes 2, even 3 jobs, just to make sure I had everything I needed. She went without so I wouldn't have to. But what you see right now, her dirty clothes, her tired face, this is only a small part of the story. Sarah shifted in her seat, her hands gripping the edge of her chair, her face flushed with both pride and discomfort, knowing that Jason was speaking from his heart but also fearing how the room might react. Still, she remained silent, her eyes locked on her son, who had always made her sacrifices worth it. Today, Jason continued, she came here like this because, even though she worked a full shift this morning and her car broke down on the way, she walked for miles just to make sure she didn't miss this moment. That's who she is. Someone who would give everything, even her last bit of energy, to show up for me. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. The audience was now deeply engrossed, leaning forward to catch every word. Some parents exchanged looks of sympathy, while others seemed to be reassessing their initial judgments. The murmurs from his classmates had stopped altogether. It was as though the entire room collectively understood that something far more profound than a graduation speech was unfolding. Jason's hands gripped the edge of the podium. I know today is supposed to be about celebrating our achievements, but I can't accept this diploma without acknowledging the person who made it all possible for me, my mother, who didn't get to finish high school herself because she had me when she was just a teenager. She gave up her own dreams so I could chase mine. A few gasps echoed from the crowd, and Jason saw the impact his words were having. His friends, who moments ago had been giggling about his mother's appearance, were now looking down, their faces softened by the realization of what she had endured. He could sense the shift in the room, the slow turn from judgment to understanding. Jason's voice grew stronger. So, this diploma, this isn't just mine, it belongs to her too. Every hour she worked, every tear she shed, every sacrifice she made, it's all wrapped up in this piece of paper, and while I stand here, wearing this cap and gown, the truth is, she's the real hero of this story. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. She had always been proud of Jason, but hearing him speak like this, in front of all these people, left her speechless. She had spent so many years pushing through exhaustion, pain, and doubt, and in this moment, it all felt worth it. The crowd was utterly silent, hanging on to every word Jason said. His heart pounded as he spoke the next line, knowing it would seal this moment in everyone's memory. So, Mom, Jason said, turning fully to face her now, I don't care what you're wearing or what anyone else thinks. To me, you're the most beautiful, strongest person in this room, and I want everyone to know it. The room was so silent, you could have heard a pin drop. Every eye was now fixed on Sarah, sitting in the back row, her hands trembling in her lap. Jason's words hung in the air, raw and powerful, cutting through any lingering judgment that might have existed moments before. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, until finally, one person in the front row stood up. It was an older man, one of the faculty members who had been watching the ceremony with a quiet reverence. His face softened as he looked toward Sarah, and slowly, he began to clap. The sound was steady, respectful, but as his hands came together, more people followed. Soon, the entire room filled with applause. Parents, students, and teachers alike stood one by one, their clapping growing louder with each passing second. Jason glanced back at his mother, who was now openly crying, her hands covering her mouth as she shook her head in disbelief. She had never wanted this kind of attention. She had always preferred to stay in the background, silently supporting her son, but in this moment, she couldn't hide. Jason had brought her into the spotlight, and the room was honoring her in a way she had never expected. The applause swelled, rising into a full-blown standing ovation. Jason remained at the podium, his eyes glistening, though he managed to hold back his own tears. He waited until the applause began to fade, then spoke once more into the microphone, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, he said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. But this applause isn't for me, it's for my mom, because without her, none of this would be possible. The crowd slowly took their seats, though the energy in the room had shifted entirely. What had started as a typical graduation ceremony had turned into a moment of deep reflection, a reminder of the sacrifices so many parents make in the quiet shadows of their children's lives. Jason felt the weight of the moment, but he also knew he wasn't finished. Taking a deep breath, he added, "There's one more thing I want to say before I leave this stage. To everyone here who has someone in their life, whether it's a parent, a guardian, a friend, someone who has been there for you, supporting you when things got hard, don't wait until it's too late to thank them. Don't let your pride, or embarrassment, or fear stop you from showing them how much they mean to you, because trust me, none of us gets to where we are alone." A few parents in the audience nodded, clearly touched by Jason's words. Some of the graduates, who had been checking their phones or staring off into space earlier, were now paying close attention, their expressions thoughtful. Jason could see in their eyes that his message was sinking in, the way the simple truth of his story connected with their own experiences. And Mom, Jason continued, turning once again to face Sarah, I want to say this in front of everyone here. Thank you. Thank you for never giving up, even when things were tough. Thank you for believing in me, even when I doubted myself. I love you, more than words could ever say. Sarah stood up now, no longer able to stay seated. Her legs wobbled beneath her, but she managed to stand tall, her face streaked with tears. The entire auditorium turned to face her as Jason stepped away from the podium and made his way down the steps. Without hesitation, he walked straight to the back of the room, toward his mother. The audience watched in stunned silence as Jason crossed the distance between them. When he reached her, he didn't say anything. He simply wrapped his arms around her in a tight embrace. The two of them stood there, mother and son, holding on to each other like they were the only two people in the room. For a moment, time seemed to stop. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft sobs from Sarah as she held her son close, her hands clutching the back of his graduation gown like she never wanted to let go. As Jason held his mother close, the audience remained spellbound, their hearts caught in the tenderness of the moment. The principal, standing on stage, cleared his throat, signaling that it was time to continue with the ceremony. Jason slowly pulled away from his mother, wiping a tear from his cheek before returning to his seat among the graduates. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur for Jason. He smiled at his classmates as they received their diplomas, but his thoughts were still on his mother, sitting in the back of the room, finally feeling seen for all she had done. It wasn't until the final speech was delivered and the graduates were released that Jason's mind came back to the present. Students surged toward the exits, eager to celebrate with their families. Jason made his way through the crowd, intending to meet up with his mother, but before he could reach her, a man in a sharp suit approached him. He had an air of authority, and Jason recognized him as one of the special guests from the university's scholarship board. "Jason Carter?" the man asked, extending his hand with a warm smile. "I'm Mark Stevenson. I couldn't help but hear your speech earlier. It was one of the most moving moments I've ever witnessed at a graduation ceremony." Jason shook his hand, still unsure where this was going. "Thank you, sir. I just wanted people to know what my mom has done for me." Mark nodded, his expression growing serious. "And that's exactly why I'm here. We award scholarships to students who not only excel academically but also show extraordinary character and resilience. After hearing your story, we believe you're exactly the kind of person we want to support." Jason's eyes widened. He had applied for several scholarships, but he hadn't expected anything beyond the small grants he had already received. His grades were strong, but he knew the competition was fierce. Mark continued, "We've just decided to offer you a full scholarship for your entire college education. That includes tuition, books, and living expenses. You won't have to worry about working multiple jobs or taking on any debt." For a moment, Jason was speechless. The weight of Mark's words hit him like a tidal wave. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, one that could change everything for both him and his mother. He had always planned to work part-time through college to help support them, but with this scholarship, he could focus entirely on his studies and future career. I don't know what to say," Jason stammered, his voice thick with emotion. "This is incredible." Mark smiled. "There's nothing you need to say, Jason. Your actions speak louder than words. You've proven that you're not just a brilliant student but a young man with a heart of gold. We want to invest in your future because we know you'll make a difference." Jason's thoughts immediately turned to his mother. This wasn't just his achievement, it was hers too. Without her sacrifices, he would never have made it this far. "Can I tell my mom?" Jason asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark chuckled softly. "Of course. In fact, I'd love to meet her." Jason quickly made his way back to where his mother sat, still surrounded by a few lingering parents who had approached her to offer kind words. She looked up as Jason approached, her eyes red from crying, but her smile was as radiant as ever. "Mom, there's someone I want you to meet," Jason said, motioning for Mark to join them. Mark extended his hand to Sarah, and she shook it cautiously, still unsure of what was happening. "Mrs. Carter," Mark said, "I just wanted to personally thank you for raising such an incredible young man. His speech today moved all of us, and because of his strength, determination, and heart, we'd like to offer him a full scholarship for his college education." Sarah's eyes widened, and her hand flew to her mouth. "A full scholarship?" she whispered, barely able to believe what she was hearing. Jason nodded, his smile wide. "Yeah, Mom, I won't have to worry about paying for anything." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes again, but this time they were tears of joy. She had spent years worrying about how they would manage financially once Jason went off to college, but now, all of those worries seemed to melt away. She reached out and hugged Jason tightly, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, Jason. You've worked so hard for this. You deserve it." Jason held her close, knowing that this moment was just as much hers as it was his. They had come so far together, through every hardship and challenge, and now, standing on the other side, their future looked brighter than ever. As the sun began to set outside the auditorium, casting a golden glow through the large windows, Jason and Sarah stepped out into the cool evening air. The crowd of graduates and their families milled around, laughing, taking pictures, and soaking in the joy of the moment. Jason, however, couldn't stop thinking about everything that had just happened. The scholarship, the speech, the standing ovation. It all felt surreal, like a dream he never expected to live. Walking beside him, Sarah still seemed in shock. She had been quiet since hearing about the scholarship, her thoughts swirling with emotions. The exhaustion from her long day was finally catching up to her, but she couldn't bring herself to feel anything but pride. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every worry had led to this. The moment when her son's future was secure, Jason turned to her, sensing the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. "Mom, you okay?" She blinked up at him, her face still streaked with the remnants of her tears. "I'm more than okay, Jason. I never thought this would happen. All those years, it was worth it." They found a quiet bench away from the crowd and sat down. Jason looked at his mother, seeing the deep lines of exhaustion etched into her face, the toll of years spent working herself to the bone. He knew that her sacrifices were more than just financial. She had given up so much of herself, her dreams, to ensure that he had the chance to chase his. "Mom," he said softly, his eyes full of gratitude, "I know I can never repay you for everything you've done for me, but I want to start." Sarah shook her head, her hand reaching to gently squeeze his arm. "Jason, you don't owe me anything. You've already given me the greatest gift just by being the person you are." "No, Mom," Jason insisted, his voice growing more determined. "I mean it, you gave up so much for me, and now it's time for me to do something for you." Sarah furrowed her brow, clearly confused by where Jason was going with this. He smiled, knowing what he was about to say would surprise her. He had been thinking about this for a long time, but now, with the scholarship lifting the financial burden off his shoulders, he knew the time was right. "I want you to go back to school, Mom." Sarah blinked, taken aback. "What?" "Jason, I can't, I'm too old for that, and with work, I don't have the time." "I'm serious," Jason interrupted gently. "You told me once that you had to drop out of high school when you had me. You never got the chance to finish your education, but now, you can. You've always wanted to be a nurse, right? There are programs that could help you get your diploma and start working toward that." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes again, but this time they were mixed with a deep, overwhelming gratitude. She had always dreamed of becoming a nurse, but life had taken her on a different path. One that had required her to put her dreams on hold to provide for Jason. She had buried that desire for so long that it almost felt like it wasn't hers anymore. "Jason," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I don't know if I can do that, it's been so long. I wouldn't even know where to start." Jason smiled warmly. "You can do anything, Mom, you've already proven that, and now, you don't have to do it alone. You've spent years lifting me up, making sure I had everything I needed. Let me help you now, let me be the one to support your dream." Sarah looked down at her hands, her fingers shaking slightly. The idea of going back to school at her age terrified her, but deep down, there was a small spark of excitement, a glimmer of hope that she hadn't felt in years. Jason was offering her a chance at redemption. Not just for the education she never finished, but for the dreams she had long ago abandoned. "But what about the bills, the house?" she asked, still holding on to the practical concerns that had always kept her from thinking about herself. "We'll figure it out," Jason said confidently. "I'll have a scholarship to cover my college expenses, and we'll find a way." "You always do." Sarah's tears flowed freely now, but for the first time in years, they weren't tears of worry or exhaustion. They were tears of possibility. She had spent so long putting others before herself, never daring to dream again. But now, sitting beside her son, who had grown into a man far wiser and more generous than she could have ever imagined, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could chase her own dreams too. With a deep breath, Sarah looked into Jason's eyes and smiled. A smile full of love, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. "Okay," she whispered, "let's do it." Jason wrapped his arm around his mother's shoulders, pulling her close. They sat there in the fading light, the weight of the past lifting as a new future, one filled with possibility, began to unfold before them. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of excitement and change. Jason had begun preparing for his transition to college, filling out paperwork, attending orientation, and meeting with advisors, but the most exciting development of all was happening for Sarah. After years of putting her dreams on hold, she had finally enrolled in a program to get her GED. It was the first step on her journey toward becoming a nurse, a dream she had carried in her heart for as long as she could remember. At first, Sarah was hesitant. The idea of going back to school at her age was daunting. She feared that she would be out of place, that she wouldn't be able to keep up with the younger students, or that her years away from academics had dulled her ability to learn. But Jason had stood by her side, encouraging her every step of the way. "You're going to do great, Mom," he would say, reminding her that she had overcome far bigger challenges in life. "This is just the next chapter, you've got this." Sarah's first day of class was nerve-wracking. As she sat down at a desk, surrounded by other students, she felt a familiar rush of anxiety wash over her, but then she remembered Jason's words, and she took a deep breath. She wasn't doing this alone. She had her son's unwavering support, and that gave her strength. Over time, Sarah began to thrive in her classes. The knowledge started coming back to her, slowly at first, but then with a growing confidence. Her instructors noticed her dedication, often pulling her aside to compliment her on her work ethic. She was determined, driven by the belief that it wasn't too late for her to pursue her dreams. Every time she doubted herself, she thought of Jason's speech at the graduation, and it pushed her forward. Meanwhile, Jason was excelling in his own right. College life was demanding, but with the scholarship covering his financial burdens, he was able to focus entirely on his studies. He worked hard in his classes, knowing that everything his mother had sacrificed for him had led to this moment. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just for himself, but for his mother, who was finally getting the chance to live the life she had put on hold. As the months passed, Jason and Sarah fell into a rhythm. They would often sit together in the evenings, each of them working on their assignments. Jason with his college coursework, and Sarah with her GED studies. It became their new normal, a bond strengthened not by their past struggles but by their shared journey of growth and redemption. One night, after a particularly long study session, Sarah looked over at Jason, who was deep in concentration, scribbling notes for an upcoming exam. She smiled to herself, feeling a swell of pride for the man her son had become. "You know," she said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never imagined I'd be sitting here, doing homework again at my age." Jason chuckled, glancing up from his notebook. "It's kind of weird, right? But also kind of awesome." Sarah nodded, her eyes twinkling. "Yeah, it is. I feel like I'm finally doing something for myself." "You are, Mom, and you deserve it." For the first time in a long while, Sarah allowed herself to dream, not just for Jason, but for herself. She could see the path ahead of her more clearly now, and it was filled with possibilities she had once thought out of reach. Her goal of becoming a nurse wasn't just a distant fantasy anymore. It was within her grasp, and she was determined to make it happen. As their study session came to a close, Sarah leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of the day's work on her shoulders but also the lightness of hope in her heart. "Thank you, Jason," she said softly, her voice full of gratitude. Jason smiled, knowing exactly what she meant. "You don't have to thank me, Mom, we're in this together." And they were, mother and son, walking side by side into a future that was brighter than either of them could have ever imagined. The seasons shifted from summer to fall, and soon, winter was upon them. Jason was now well into his first year of college, tackling each challenge with the same determination that had carried him through high school. His days were filled with lectures, study groups, and late-night cramming sessions, but through it all, he kept his focus on the future. Sarah, too, was deep in her studies. Every evening after finishing her shift at the diner, she would come home, brew a cup of coffee, and settle down with her textbooks. At first, it had been hard to balance work and school, but now, with Jason's encouragement, it was becoming routine, and with each passing week, she felt her confidence grow. Her mind, which she once feared had grown rusty, was coming alive again. One cold December evening, Jason came home from college for the holiday break. The moment he stepped through the door of their small, cozy home, he was greeted by the smell of homemade stew simmering on the stove. It was a rare treat, something Sarah made only on special occasions, as it was a bit too expensive for their usual budget. "Mom, it smells amazing in here," Jason said, dropping his backpack by the door and shrugging off his coat. Sarah turned from the stove, her face glowing with the warmth of the kitchen. "I thought we could celebrate," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Jason raised an eyebrow, curious. "Celebrate what?" With a smile, Sarah reached into a folder on the counter and pulled out a single piece of paper. She handed it to Jason, her hands trembling slightly from the excitement. Jason's eyes widened as he looked at the paper, realizing what it was. A certificate of completion. Sarah had passed her GED exams. She had officially graduated. "Mom," Jason exclaimed, pulling her into a tight hug, "you did it. I'm so proud of you." Tears of joy filled Sarah's eyes as she hugged him back. "I couldn't have done it without you, Jason. You gave me the strength to believe I could." Jason stepped back, holding the certificate as if it were a priceless treasure. "This is huge, Mom. What's next?" Sarah took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped away a tear. "Well, I've been looking into nursing programs. There's one at the community college nearby, and I'm going to apply. It'll take a couple of years, but if I can get in, I'll finally be able to start working toward my dream." Jason's heart swelled with pride. His mother had always been his hero, but now, seeing her take these steps toward her own goals, he realized just how strong she truly was. All those years of sacrifice, of putting him first, had not diminished her spirit. Instead, they had made her resilient, determined to reclaim the future she had once set aside. "That's amazing, Mom," Jason said. "You're going to be the best nurse." "I know it." Sarah smiled, her heart full of hope and possibility. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was living, chasing after a dream she had long thought impossible. And the best part? She wasn't doing it alone. As they sat down to dinner that night, laughter filled the room. They talked about their future plans, both of them excited about what lay ahead. Jason shared stories from his college classes, while Sarah spoke about the nursing program she hoped to start soon. It felt like a turning point in their lives. A moment where the hardships of the past were finally giving way to something brighter. Over dessert, Jason leaned back in his chair, looking at his mother with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "I've been thinking about what you said at my graduation, about how you never got to chase your dreams because of me." Sarah looked up, her brow furrowing slightly. "Jason, No, let me finish." Jason interrupted gently. "I used to feel guilty about that, like maybe I held you back, but now I see that wasn't true. You never gave up on me. And because of that, I was able to go after my dreams, and now, watching you go after yours, it makes me realize that we've both been lifting each other up all along." Sarah's eyes filled with tears again, but this time, they were tears of joy. She reached across the table, taking Jason's hand in hers. "You've never held me back, Jason, you've always been my greatest motivation, and now, seeing you succeed, knowing that I had a part in that, it's the greatest reward I could ask for." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them reflecting on the journey they had taken together. It hadn't been easy. There had been countless struggles along the way, but they had made it through, and now, they were both on paths that promised brighter futures, both for themselves and for each other. As the night wore on, they continued to talk, dreaming about what the next few years would bring. Jason's college graduation was still a few years away, and Sarah's journey toward becoming a nurse was just beginning, but they both knew, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, just as they always had. The new year brought with it fresh beginnings and renewed purpose. Sarah had successfully applied to the nursing program, and soon, her schedule became as demanding as Jason's, between classes, clinical rotations, and her shifts at the diner. She had little time for herself, yet, every morning she woke up with a sense of accomplishment, knowing she was inching closer to her lifelong dream. For Jason, his second year of college was proving to be even more challenging than the first. The workload had intensified, and the pressure to maintain his scholarship was always on his mind. Yet, despite the long hours and mounting expectations, he never wavered. His mother's dedication was a constant source of motivation. If she could manage to juggle everything she was dealing with, he could do the same. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Jason sat in his dorm room, staring at the pile of books and papers scattered across his desk. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen to see a text from his mother. "How's everything going? Just finished a long shift, heading to study group, miss you." Jason smiled to himself. Even in her exhaustion, she always took the time to check in on him. He quickly typed a reply. "Miss you too, Mom, hanging in there, you?" A few seconds later, his phone buzzed again. "Tired, but good, we'll get through this, one day at a time." Jason put his phone down and sighed. He was proud of how far they had both come, but he could feel the weight of the pressure beginning to build. There were days when it all felt overwhelming, when the constant grind of school, work, and life seemed too much to handle. But every time he felt like giving up, he thought of his mother, pushing herself through exhaustion, determined to finish what she had started. He couldn't let her down. Weeks passed, and the strain of their new lives began to take its toll. Jason noticed that his mother was growing more tired than usual. Her shifts at the diner were long, and the demands of her nursing program were intense. She rarely complained, but Jason could see the fatigue in her eyes when they video called. "Mom, are you okay?" Jason asked one evening as they talked. "You look really tired." Sarah smiled, brushing off his concern. "I'm fine, Jason, just a lot going on, that's all. It's nothing I can't handle." But Jason wasn't convinced. He knew his mother too well. She had always been the type to push herself beyond her limits, to keep going even when her body was telling her to slow down. And now, with both work and school pulling her in different directions, he feared she was burning out. "Mom, maybe you should take a break," Jason suggested gently. "You're doing so much, it's okay to slow down." Sarah shook her head, her determination shining through. "I can't, Jason, I've come too far to stop now. I'm doing this for both of us." Jason understood that drive, but it didn't stop him from worrying. He knew how easy it was to get caught up in the pressure and forget to take care of yourself. He had been feeling it too. The weight of expectations, the need to keep pushing forward no matter how tired he was. But seeing his mother struggling made him realize that they both needed to find a balance. "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself, okay?" Jason said, his voice soft but firm. "You can't help anyone if you're running on empty." Sarah looked at her son through the screen, her eyes softening. She nodded slowly. "I promise, Jason, I'll try to take it easy." But as the weeks wore on, it became clear that Sarah wasn't slowing down. Her shifts at the diner grew longer as they became short-staffed, and her nursing program demanded more of her time. Jason, too, found himself struggling to keep up with his coursework. spending late nights in the library trying to stay on top of his classes. One evening, after an exhausting day, Jason received a call from Sarah's coworker at the diner. His heart dropped when he answered and heard the urgency in the woman's voice. "Jason, it's Sarah. She collapsed during her shift. We've called an ambulance." Jason's blood ran cold. He had feared this would happen, that his mother would push herself too far. Without thinking, he grabbed his coat and rushed out of his dorm room, heading for the nearest bus stop to get to the hospital. His mind raced with fear and guilt. He should have made her slow down. He should have done more to help her. When Jason finally arrived at the hospital, his heart pounded in his chest as he hurried to the emergency room. He found Sarah lying on a bed, an IV in her arm, looking pale and weak, but when she saw him, she smiled softly, as if to reassure him. "I'm fine, Jason," she said, her voice weak, just a little overworked. "That's all." Jason sat down beside her, his hands trembling as he took hers in his. "Mom, you scared me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You can't keep doing this. You have to slow down." Sarah nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I know. I just didn't want to let you down." "You could never let me down," Jason said, his voice firm. "You've done more than enough. Mom, it's time to start taking care of yourself." As they sat there in the quiet of the hospital room, Jason realized something important. They had both been running at full speed, trying to prove something to each other and to themselves, but in doing so, they had forgotten the most important thing: taking care of the people they loved. From that moment on, Jason made a promise to himself and to his mother. They would support each other, but they would also find balance. They had come too far together to lose sight of what really mattered: their health, their well-being, and their relationship. As Sarah rested in the hospital bed, Jason held her hand tightly, vowing that they would get through this together. As always, the weeks following Sarah's collapse were a wake-up call for both her and Jason. Sarah, though eager to continue her nursing program, had been forced to take a medical leave to recover. The doctors warned her that she was dangerously close to burning out completely, and if she didn't slow down, her health would suffer even more. For the first time in years, she had no choice but to rest. At first, it was difficult for Sarah to accept. She had always been the type to push through, to keep working even when her body told her otherwise. But sitting in that hospital bed, looking at her son's worried face, she realized she had been neglecting herself for far too long. She couldn't keep sacrificing her own well-being, not if she wanted to be there for Jason and for herself. Jason, on the other hand, felt a deep sense of responsibility. His mother had been his rock for so many years, and now it was his turn to be hers. He made the decision to scale back his own hectic schedule, cutting down on extracurricular activities and taking a lighter course load for the next semester. It wasn't an easy choice. He loved his studies and had always prided himself on being a high achiever, but after seeing his mother collapse, he knew that no academic achievement was worth risking his own health or their relationship. Sarah's recovery was slow but steady. During her time off, she began to reconnect with herself in ways she hadn't in years. Instead of rushing from one responsibility to the next, she found time to read books, go for walks, and simply sit and enjoy the quiet moments of life. She began attending therapy sessions to work through the stress she had been carrying for so long, and for the first time, she allowed herself to focus on her own mental and emotional well-being. Jason, too, found that slowing down had its benefits. He had more time to connect with his friends, focus on his studies, and even take up a new hobby, photography. He would often visit his mother at home, where she was recovering, and they would spend evenings talking, laughing, and planning for the future. The pressure they had both been feeling slowly began to lift, replaced by a sense of peace and purpose. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the sun set over the horizon, Jason turned to his mother with a thoughtful look. "You know, Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what happened," he said softly. "We've both been running ourselves into the ground, trying to prove something, but we don't have to do that anymore. We've already proven everything we need to." Sarah smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "You're right, Jason. I've spent so much of my life feeling like I had to keep going, no matter what, because I didn't want to let you down, but I've realized that taking care of myself is just as important as taking care of you." Jason nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Exactly, we don't have to be perfect, we just have to be there for each other." For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors of the sky deepen into shades of pink and orange. It was a simple moment, but for both of them, it represented something much larger: the understanding that life wasn't a race. They had both been pushing themselves so hard for so long, but now, they had learned that sometimes, the greatest strength comes from knowing when to slow down. As the weeks passed, Sarah continued to regain her strength, and eventually, she re-enrolled in her nursing program with a renewed sense of purpose. This time, however, she approached her studies differently. She no longer felt the need to push herself beyond her limits. Instead, she paced herself, allowing room for rest and reflection. She was determined to achieve her goal of becoming a nurse. But now she knew that she could do it without sacrificing her health or happiness. Jason, too, had found a new rhythm in his life. He still worked hard in his college classes, but he no longer felt the overwhelming pressure to be perfect. He had learned to take breaks, to enjoy life's simple pleasures, and to appreciate the moments of connection he shared with his mother. Their relationship had deepened, no longer defined solely by the struggles they had faced but by the joy and support they now found in each other. One evening, after a long day of studying, Jason called his mother to check in. "How's it going, Mom? How was class today?" Sarah's voice was light and cheerful on the other end of the line. "It was great, Jason. I feel like I'm finally finding my groove, and guess what? I aced my anatomy exam." Jason grinned, pride swelling in his chest. "That's amazing, Mom. I knew you could do it." Sarah laughed softly. "Thanks, Jason. I couldn't have done it without you." As they talked, Jason felt a deep sense of contentment settle over him. They had both come so far, and though the road had been difficult, it had brought them closer together in ways they never could have imagined. Their bond, once forged in sacrifice and struggle, was now strengthened by love, understanding, and mutual respect. As their conversation wound down, Sarah's voice grew soft. "Jason, I just want you to know how proud I am of you, not just for everything you've achieved, but for the person you've become. You've taught me so much, and I'm so grateful for you." Jason's heart swelled with emotion. "I'm proud of you too, Mom, more than you'll ever know." As they said their goodbyes, Jason hung up the phone and sat back in his chair, a smile on his face. He realized that their journey was far from over. There would be new challenges ahead, new mountains to climb, but now, they had the tools to face them, together, with love, patience, and a newfound understanding of what truly mattered. The day Sarah had been dreaming of finally arrived. A day she had once thought impossible. It was the day of her nursing school graduation, and the air was filled with the same sense of excitement and pride that Jason had felt at his own graduation just a couple of years before. Only this time, it was Sarah's moment. The auditorium was packed with fellow nursing students, their families, and faculty members. Jason sat near the front, watching with a mixture of pride and awe as his mother, dressed in her white graduation gown, prepared to walk across the stage. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but she had made it. She had defied the odds, proving to herself and everyone around her that it was never too late to pursue a dream. As Sarah's name was called, she stood up, her heart pounding with emotion. She glanced toward Jason, who was smiling at her, his eyes filled with admiration. For a brief moment, she hesitated, the weight of everything she had gone through to get to this point pressing down on her. But then she took a deep breath and stepped forward, walking with confidence and grace toward the stage. The applause was loud and warm as Sarah crossed the stage to receive her diploma. When she shook hands with the dean of the nursing school, tears welled up in her eyes. This diploma wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a symbol of all the sacrifices she had made, all the late nights studying, all the years of putting others first, and now, standing on this stage, she felt the weight of that sacrifice lift as she realized she had finally done something for herself. As Sarah descended the stage and returned to her seat, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And most importantly, she hadn't walked it alone. Jason had been there every step of the way, just as she had been there for him. After the ceremony, Jason found her in the crowd and pulled her into a tight embrace. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it." Sarah hugged him back, her tears flowing freely now. "We did it, Jason. I couldn't have done this without you." Jason shook his head, stepping back to look at her. "No, Mom, you did this. You put in the work, you pushed through, and you made it happen. I was just lucky enough to watch you do it." They stood together in the crowded auditorium, the noise and celebration around them fading into the background as they shared this quiet, intimate moment. Both of them knew that this day wasn't just about a diploma, it was about everything they had overcome together, the hardships, the sacrifices, the moments of doubt, and how they had emerged stronger because of it. Later that evening, back at their house, they sat together at the kitchen table, laughing and reminiscing about the journey they had been on. The house, once filled with tension and worry, now felt lighter, warmer, a reflection of the peace they had both found. "I've been thinking about something," Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Jason looked up from his coffee, curious. "What's that?" "I've been thinking about how this isn't just the end of something, it's the beginning, too, for both of us." She smiled, her eyes filled with the same quiet determination that had carried her through so many difficult times. "You're about to finish college soon, and I'm starting my career as a nurse. We've both got so much ahead of us." Jason nodded, his heart swelling with pride for his mother. "Yeah, we do, and whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed Jason's hand. "I couldn't have asked for a better partner in this journey." Jason squeezed her hand back, a smile playing on his lips. "Neither could I, Mom." The next few years would bring new challenges and new adventures for both of them, but they were ready. They had learned how to balance ambition with self-care, how to lean on each other when times got tough, and how to appreciate the small victories along the way. As they sat together that evening, the sun setting outside the window, Jason and Sarah knew that they had already won the greatest victory of all. The strength of their bond, built through years of sacrifice, love, and unbreakable determination.